I've always hiked alone. It wasn't some brave or rebellious thing. I just liked it better that way. No one slowing me down, no one making small talk, no one complaining. Just me, the pack, the trail, and the hours of silence stretching ahead. For me, there's peace in that quiet. It was late September, the time of year when the trees start going orange and red, when the mornings come sharp with cold but the afternoons still sweat your back under a pack. I had planned a 5-day loop through the mountains in northern Idaho. Not the tourist kind, not the kind with gift shops and cell service. The real wild kind. The kind where if something goes wrong, it stays wrong. That's what I liked. I parked my truck just off a dirt forestry road, locked it up, and stepped off into the timber with a full pack and a half smile. The first day was smooth, just switchbacks through fir trees, long uphill grinds, and the occasional blue jay crashing through the branches. I made camp near a small creek, boiled water, ate a freeze-dried meal, and crawled into my tent just after the last light dropped out of the sky. Nothing weird, nothing hard. Exactly what I wanted. The second day, the trail started to get thinner. It stopped looking like something someone maintained and more like an animal trail. It wasn't supposed to be a well-used loop, and I had checked old maps and GPS overlays before setting out. I wanted it that way, but there's always a bit of unease when you're out that deep and you realize no one's been through for a while. Still, I pushed forward. The day was long, and I didn't see a single person. Not even prints, not even trash. It was just me, birds, wind, and silence. When I stopped that night, I was in a narrow valley with a slope of broken boulders on one side and thick pine on the other. I pitched the tent near a small clearing. I was tired, sore, and completely alone, or so I thought. I woke up sometime after midnight. I didn't know why. No dream, no noise, just suddenly wide awake. I lay still in the dark, listening. First, there was nothing, just the soft wind in the trees, the usual forest noises. But then I heard something soft, slow steps in the leaves, not 20 feet from the tent. They stopped, then a few more. My heart was thudding, but I didn't move. I didn't even unzip the sleeping bag. I just lay there, breathing through my nose, trying to hear better. It wasn't a deer. I've heard plenty of deer. They're clumsy, they move in quick bursts, and they never stop for long. This was slow, deliberate. One step, then another, then stillness. After what felt like an hour, the steps faded into the woods. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I walked the perimeter around my tent. I found the tracks, just one set, human, barefoot. The ground was soft from rain a couple days before, and the prints were clear. No boots, no shoes, just wide, rough-looking bare feet. They had come from the treeline, walked right up to about 10 feet from my tent, and then turned back. That should have been the sign to turn around. But I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a drifter, maybe someone else hiking off-grid, maybe a local with odd habits. I told myself a lot of things, mostly lies. By noon that day, I was already too far in to easily turn back anyway. The trail kept getting harder to follow. There were long stretches where I was relying entirely on map and compass, and I had to backtrack a few times. The forest felt different that day. It felt heavier, like there were eyes out there. I'd stop to drink water or check my bearings, and I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder more than I should have. But I didn't see anything. Not then. Late that afternoon, I found an old fire ring, not from backpackers. This one looked ancient. The rocks were blackened all the way through, the pit half filled with leaves. But there were bones in it, not big ones, squirrel maybe, or rabbit, and not clean ones. Some still had bits of fur. There were no wrappers, no tools, no sign of modern camping. Just that fire ring and the bones. I moved on fast. That night, I set up camp high on a ridge. I figured visibility was better, and if someone or something was following, they'd have a harder time sneaking up. I didn't build a fire. I barely ate. I sat still in the dark for hours, listening. Nothing came, but I still didn't sleep much. On the fourth day, things got worse. The trail was gone. Whatever game trail I had been following ended in a thicket of pine, and I had to cut through brush and climb over blowdowns just to keep moving forward. By early afternoon, I started to notice things. More bones, piles of them, scattered in weird spots. Not predator kills, these were clean, sorted almost. Skull here, ribs there, like someone had placed them. I found a small deadfall shelter too. Just logs leaned against a stump, covered in moss. Inside were piles of animal hides, some dried, some fresh. The smell made me gag. Still, I kept moving. Around 3 in the afternoon, I stopped on a slope to check the map. I felt like I was being watched. Not just the occasional glance over your shoulder feeling, but a real sense of weight on me, like eyes burning from the trees. I turned slowly, and about 50 feet up the ridge, half hidden behind a boulder, was a man. Naked, covered in dirt and black smears, hair like straw, just standing there, watching. I froze. He didn't move. I didn't yell. I didn't say anything. I just turned slowly, put the map away, and walked. Not fast, just steady. I didn't look back for over a mile. When I did, I didn't see him, but I didn't feel alone anymore either. That night, I didn't set up camp. I just kept walking. The moon was bright enough and I didn't want to stop. I walked until I was too tired to think, then found a spot under a rocky overhang and slept sitting up, knife in hand. I woke up once to the sound of a twig snapping. Just one. Then silence. When dawn came, I found a mark in the dirt near my feet. A print. Human. Closer than before. On the 5th morning, I ran. No more slow pacing, no more careful map reading. I went downhill toward where I thought the river would be. I figured if I could hit the river, I could follow it out, or maybe flag someone down if I was lucky. But the forest seemed different that day. It was like it was folding in around me. The trees looked too close together, the slopes steeper than they had before. I couldn't tell if I was going in circles. I started seeing marks carved into trees. Weird ones, just slashes and excess. Not made with a knife, maybe a sharp stone. Some of them had dried blood on them. And then I found the shelter. It was bigger than the deadfall. A proper cabin, if you could call it that. Logs tied with vines, roofed in branches and bark. Bones hanging from strings in the entrance. Skulls on sticks, dozens of them. Inside there were furs, tools made of bone, a stone fire pit, and something else, a pile of backpacks. Mine wasn't the first. There were at least 10 of them. Some torn, some stained. I found clothes too. Torn shirts, a shoe, a broken watch, a map with a route eerily similar to mine. That's when I really understood. I wasn't the first. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone lived out here and they watched the trails. Waited for people like me. People who went off alone. People who didn't check in often. People who wouldn't be missed quickly. I left everything behind. Pack food, gear. I just took my knife and the map from the other hiker's bag. I ran harder than I ever had. I went straight down the mountain, through thorns and across streams, not caring about direction anymore. Just down. That night, I slept in a tree. High up, I tied myself with a belt to a branch and held my knife all night. I didn't hear anything, but that was worse somehow. I woke up to rain. On the 6th day, I found a road. Just a dirt one, barely wide enough for a truck. I followed it for hours. I don't know how far I went, just that I kept my eyes wide the whole time. Every time the road bent or dipped out of sight, I stopped and waited. I thought I saw something move in the trees once, but it could have been an animal. I'll never know. Late that afternoon, a Forest Service truck came rumbling down the road. I didn't wave. I didn't yell. I just stood in the middle until they stopped. They asked what happened. I didn't tell them. They offered to take me to the ranger station. I nodded. At the station, they asked more questions. I said I got lost. I said I panicked and dropped my pack. I said I didn't remember the details. They didn't push too hard. They probably hear stuff like that all the time. I got home that night. I couldn't sleep for weeks. Every time the wind moved the branches outside my window, I thought it was him. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bare footprints in the dirt, that figure behind the boulder, the cabin full of bones. I didn't report it. I didn't go back. I still hike, sometimes, but never alone. and never without telling someone where I'm going. I've never had a problem being alone in the woods. In fact, I've always preferred it. There's something about the quiet out there that makes sense to me in a way the rest of the world doesn't. I've done dozens of hikes alone, long and short, in different seasons through different terrain. I'm not reckless about it. I bring maps, a GPS, a paper backup, water filter, proper layers, first aid, and enough food. I mark my routes, know my exit points, and keep my head on straight. So when I planned this 3-day hike through a lesser-known part of the state forest, I wasn't thinking about danger. I was thinking about time away from screens and people and all the usual noise. Just 3 days, starting on a Friday, ending on a Sunday. The route was a loop. I'd park at an old logging access road, hike in about 12 miles the first day, make camp near a river bend, then do 10 the second day, cutting east through a low pass, then finish with a 6-mile stretch back to my car. I'd read a couple trip reports from people who'd done it the year before. The trail wasn't maintained by the park system, but it was still passable, just overgrown in parts. That was fine by me. I didn't want to see people out there anyway. I left early Friday morning, packed light but smart. The weather was cool but dry, and I had a decent window before any real chance of rain. The dirt access road to the trailhead was rough, washed out in places, but I made it, left the car tucked into the brush, and locked everything up. It was about 7:30 when I hit the trail. The first few miles were great. The air was cool and clean. Pines gave way to patches of aspen and alder. I saw old deer tracks, scat from what I guessed was a black bear, but nothing fresh. It was quiet, peaceful. I passed through some old clearings that looked like they'd been logged decades ago, then started the steady climb toward the ridge. My boots were breaking in well, pack felt balanced, no hot spots or rubbing yet. By lunchtime, I was about halfway to my planned camp spot. I sat on a rock outcrop overlooking a shallow valley, ate jerky and nuts, and just listened to the wind. I remember thinking how perfect the whole trip was shaping up to be. The first thing that felt a little off happened maybe an hour later. I was crossing a rocky patch where the trail dipped through a narrow draw. Thick brush on either side, some loose scree underfoot. I slipped a little, caught myself, and looked up, and saw a black plastic bag caught in the branches up ahead. It was shredded, flapping in the breeze, caught on a broken-off tree limb about 9 feet off the ground. Didn't make sense to me. I'd seen trash on trails before, but never way up like that. I moved past it, figuring someone had left it behind and it got blown up there in a storm or something. It was weird, but not enough to stop. But from that point on, things started to feel different. A mile or two later, I passed what looked like an old fire pit. Not that strange in itself, backcountry hikers make them all the time. But this one was messy. Logs were scorched and half-burned, scattered like someone left in a hurry. There were empty cans nearby, rusted over but not completely collapsed. Some torn foil and a boot print, deep, bigger than mine, wider too. That's what did it, seeing that boot print. It hadn't rained in at least a week, and the edges were still defined. That meant someone had been here recently, very recently. Now, I know the woods aren't mine. Other people are allowed to be out there. But the print, the fire pit, and the shredded bag earlier started to pile up in my head in a way that didn't feel right. It wasn't fear exactly, but a kind of pressure, a sense that I needed to keep my eyes open. Still, I didn't turn around. I just moved faster, stopped less, checked over my shoulder more than usual. I kept my hand closer to the bear spray clipped to my pack strap. That kind of thing. I got to the river bend around 4 o'clock. It was as perfect a spot as I'd hoped. Soft ground underfoot, a slight rise in the terrain for the tent, and easy access to fresh water. I set up camp fast, boiled water, made a simple dinner, and tried to shake the feeling that had been clinging to me since midday. As the sun dropped, the woods went quiet again. That's normal, of course, but it felt different this time. Heavy, like the quiet wasn't just natural, but waiting. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up, branches cracking. Not close, but not far either. Once I thought I heard breathing. Not animal breathing, human, just for a second. Then silence again. I stayed inside the tent until the first light crept in. I didn't cook breakfast. I just packed fast, filled my bottles from the river, and started moving. I wanted to get to the other side of the loop by mid-afternoon. About 2 miles into the hike, I saw something that made me stop cold. A torn piece of dark blue nylon, fluttering from a tree branch about shoulder height. I recognized it right away. It was tent fabric. Same kind I used, different color. The edges were frayed, like it had been cut or ripped violently. Just hanging there. No camp nearby. No gear. Just that one piece of tent. I walked past it, kept going. My brain wanted to push through to rationalize it, but my body was locked up tight. I kept scanning the woods, watching for movement. Everything looked still, too still. Around noon, I stopped near a dry creek bed to rest. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A rope, thin like paracord, strung between 2 trees, about 10 feet apart. Not high, maybe chest level. Just there. No tarp, no shelter. Just that single length of cord tied off at both ends, pulled tight. I didn't touch it, didn't even get close. I backed up, circled wide, and moved on. The trail was harder to follow after that. Either it hadn't been used in a long time, or I wasn't reading the terrain right anymore. The GPS showed I was still on course, but the undergrowth was thicker, branches caught at my clothes, and I started slipping on moss-covered stones I didn't see in time. I was losing rhythm, losing trust in the trail, and the feeling that someone else was out there wasn't fading, it was growing. Then I found the camp. It was maybe half a mile from where I'd planned to stop that second night. Set back from the trail behind a thicket of pine. I smelled it before I saw it. A mix of smoke, old food, and something else, something sour. There were 2 tents. One collapsed, the other torn open along the side. Clothes scattered around. A cooking pot in the ashes of a dead fire. An open bag of trail mix spilling into the dirt. No people. No blood, no signs of a struggle. Just a camp that had been left in a hurry. Not abandoned neatly, like someone finishing a trip. Abandoned violently, like whoever was there had run. I stood there a long time, listening, watching. I didn't touch anything. I just backed away, heart thudding, mouth dry. I changed my plan then. I wasn't going to camp another night. I was going to push through the pass and get back to my car before dark. Even if it meant hiking past sunset. I didn't care. I just wanted out. The last stretch was a blur. Steep, narrow, and rough. I fell once, cut my hand on a sharp rock, but didn't stop. Just wrapped it in a bandana and kept going. At one point, I thought I heard movement behind me. Slow, deliberate. I stopped, turned, waited. Nothing, but I could feel it. Someone was there. Not ahead, behind, matching pace, staying just far enough back not to be seen. I didn't stop again. I reached the logging road at dusk. My car was still there, dusty, but untouched. I unlocked it with shaking hands, tossed my pack in, and got inside, locked the doors, sat there with my hands on the wheel, staring out at the trees. I drove home that night, didn't stop, didn't sleep, just kept going until the sky started to lighten again and I was back in the city. I reported what I saw, the torn tent, the abandoned camp. The ranger station took my report, said they'd look into it. Maybe they did. I never followed up. That was 6 months ago. I haven't gone hiking since, not even on day trails, because the truth is, I wasn't alone out there. I know that now. Someone was out there with me, watching, waiting, leaving signs, maybe on purpose, maybe just careless, but they were there. And what scares me most, what I can't stop thinking about, is how careful they were not to be seen, not to leave tracks, not to make noise, how they stayed just close enough to know where I was, but far enough that I couldn't catch them. They weren't lost, they weren't camping, they were hunting, and they picked the right trail for it. A forgotten loop, barely marked, far from help, with no cell service and no traffic. They didn't catch me. I was lucky, that's all. Just luck. Next time, someone else might not be. I've always liked hiking alone. It's quiet, simple, and makes me feel like everything slows down. I'm not antisocial or anything. I just enjoy silence more than most people do. My job's remote, my apartment is tiny, and the forest feels like the only place where I can think clearly. I try to take solo hikes every few weeks. This one was supposed to be a simple weekend out, nothing special. Just 2 days in the wilderness, somewhere a few hours from the city. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. That was the first mistake. The trail I chose was called Hunter's Ridge, part of an old path through national forest land. I found it through a small online forum where people shared remote and less popular trails. A guy had posted a GPS route that he claimed was perfect for a weekend off-grid. I checked it out, mapped it to my phone, downloaded the offline version, packed my bag, and left on a Saturday morning in April. The drive took about 3 hours. I passed a few gas stations, a couple of dead little towns, and then a long stretch of nothing but trees. It was already mid-morning when I parked on the gravel shoulder where the GPS map showed the trailhead. No signs, no markers, just a small opening in the tree line and a patch of flattened grass that looked like maybe a truck had parked there once. I liked that. It meant nobody else would be out there. The first few miles of the hike were exactly what I wanted. Steady incline, nice mix of pine and birch trees, dry underfoot with scattered dead leaves. Birds were chirping. Everything smelled like soil and sap. I kept a good pace, stopping every hour or so for water or a snack. I wasn't in a rush. The plan was to make it about 7 or 8 miles in, find a decent spot, and set up camp for the night. Then head back the next morning. By early afternoon, I was deep enough in that the trail disappeared completely. That wasn't unexpected. I had the GPS route saved, and the guy on the forum had warned that there wouldn't be an official trail the whole way. I followed the plotted line on my phone, using landmarks and compass directions to check myself. Everything was fine. I passed a long ridge with exposed stone, scrambled up the side of it, and stood for a while overlooking the forest below. It was totally silent except for the wind in the branches. I pushed on another few miles. Around 5 p.m., I found a small clearing just off the line on my map, flat enough for a tent and surrounded on 3 sides by trees. I dropped my pack, stretched my legs, and started gathering wood for a fire. The air was cooling fast, and I wanted some warmth once the sun went down. Everything felt normal. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. Dinner was simple: boiled water, dehydrated rice and beans, a protein bar. I sat near the fire with my back against a tree, watching the sky shift from blue to gray to black. I wasn't thinking about much, just listening to the forest. Once the sun dipped, it got real cold real fast. I crawled into my tent, zipped everything shut, and tried to sleep. I don't wear a watch, but I check my phone for time when I wake up at night. Around 1 a.m., I opened my eyes and realized I wasn't asleep anymore. I didn't know why. No sounds, no movement outside. I lay still, listening. Sometimes a squirrel or small animal can wake you up with movement, but this wasn't that. There wasn't any noise. That was the problem. The silence was unnatural. No insects, no wind, no rustling. It was like the whole forest had gone dead. I've hiked enough to know that kind of quiet usually means something bigger is nearby, maybe a bear or a cougar. I stayed still, heart beating faster than it should have, trying to listen for movement. Nothing. After 10 or 15 minutes, I heard something. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't any animal I could name. It was footsteps, human ones, slow, dragging, spaced out like whoever was walking didn't care about being quiet. They came from the left side of my tent. I couldn't see anything. My tent was shut tight, and I didn't want to make noise unzipping it. I held my breath and stayed flat on my back, barely blinking. The footsteps stopped maybe 10 feet from the tent. I waited completely still. After a while, they started again, circling. Not in a fast way, more like whoever it was thinking, calculating. They walked slowly around the tent twice, then stopped behind it. I don't know how long I lay there like that. Felt like an hour, but it could have been 20 minutes. Eventually, the footsteps faded. I stayed frozen for at least another half hour, waiting for them to come back. Nothing. Eventually, I heard the usual night sounds again. distant owls, wind brushing against the trees. I didn't sleep. I just waited, counting minutes in the dark. When the sun came up, I crawled out slowly, every muscle tense. The fire was cold. Everything looked untouched. No tracks in the dirt. But the back of the tent, there were 3 long scratches on the fabric. Not deep, just faint marks, like someone dragged a knife or a sharp stick across it. That was enough. I packed up fast, barely ate, and got moving. I decided not to go back the exact way I came. I wanted to loop westward, then south, then east to reconnect with the gravel road. It would take longer, but I wanted to avoid wherever the hell I had camped. The hike that day was harder. The terrain got rockier and the forest thicker. By late afternoon, I was at least 10 miles from where I started. I had barely stopped. Every sound in the forest felt wrong. I kept thinking I heard someone walking behind me, just out of sync with my own footsteps. I turn around quick and see nothing, but the feeling never left, like I wasn't alone. I pushed farther than I planned, kept walking past sunset, using a headlamp to see. I knew I was close to a service road. My phone showed the edge of it maybe 2 miles southeast. I didn't want to camp again. I just wanted to sleep in my car, lock the doors, drive home. Around 8 p.m., I hit something that stopped me cold. It was a backpack, sitting in the middle of a narrow path, upright. No mud, no dirt, no leaves stuck to it. It looked like it had been placed there, carefully, deliberately. It wasn't mine. I hadn't passed anyone. I hadn't seen anyone. But the pack was just sitting there, waiting. I didn't touch it. I walked around it wide, eyes scanning the trees, heart hammering. I kept walking, faster than before, not even checking the GPS. The next thing I hit was a boot. Just one. 100 yards past the backpack. Torn laces. Mud caked on the heel. No foot in it, just the boot. Again, just sitting there like someone had placed it on purpose. Then the smell hit me, came in waves, thick and sour, like something dead. I covered my nose with my shirt and kept moving. I passed a jacket, a crushed water bottle, a map half buried under pine needles, all scattered along the trail. It was like breadcrumbs, only they weren't leading anywhere. They were just there to mess with me. I started jogging. Branches snapped against my arms. I stopped looking at the GPS. I just wanted out. I didn't care which direction anymore. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing and saw a power line cutting through the trees. That meant the road was close. I followed it. My legs were shaking, and my feet were raw from blisters, but I didn't stop. When I finally hit the gravel road, I dropped to my knees in the dirt and just breathed. My car was still there, untouched. I unlocked it, got in, locked the doors, and sat there for almost half an hour before I could even put the keys in the ignition. I drove all night, didn't stop for food, didn't answer texts, didn't check anything until I was home. When I finally looked at my phone again, I realized something. The GPS track I'd been following wasn't official. It wasn't even real. The guy who posted it had deleted his account. The forum thread was gone. I couldn't find a single record of it, like it was never there. I've thought about that a lot since then. I don't know who was out there with me. I don't know what they wanted. Maybe nothing. Maybe it was just bad luck. But I haven't hiked alone since. I don't think I ever will again, because I've never been that scared in my life. Not from a movie, not from a nightmare, not even close. Not until I heard someone circling my tent in the dead silence of a forest with no name. And that silence still echoes in my head sometimes, even now. I've always enjoyed hiking. There's something about being alone in nature, the only sounds being the wind rustling the leaves or the occasional call of a bird. It was peaceful, at least at first. On that particular day, I was hiking a trail I'd never taken before, the kind of trail that seemed to disappear into the deep woods with no real sign of what lay ahead. I'd been on a few hikes in this area before, but this one was different. The usual well-marked paths and reassuring signs weren't there. Instead, it was an old trail, barely visible, more like a faint memory of a trail that had once been traveled frequently. The edges of the path were overgrown with thick brush and vines, and the ground was uneven, filled with roots and rocks. But something drew me to it, a curiosity I couldn't explain. I'd packed light, just a small backpack with water, some snacks, and a first aid kit. I wasn't planning to be out for too long, just a short day hike. The sky was overcast, the kind of sky that made everything look a little dimmer, as though the sun couldn't quite push through the clouds. The first hour went by easily enough. The air smelled fresh, the ground beneath my boots was firm, and the forest around me was serene. I was deep enough in now that I couldn't hear the highway anymore, just the rustling of the trees and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The trail twisted and turned, climbing steadily through the dense woods, and I felt my senses sharpening, as if the forest itself was testing me. The deeper I went, the less familiar everything felt. The trees were larger here, towering giants with thick trunks that twisted and turned in odd shapes. The underbrush grew thicker, and the path seemed to narrow, as though the forest was closing in on me. Every now and then, I would look up and catch glimpses of the sky through the canopy, but it was always covered by a thick blanket of leaves, leaving the forest below in near darkness. At some point, the feeling of being watched crept over me. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, but I couldn't shake the sensation that something, or someone, was observing me from the shadows. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a trick of the mind, but it stuck with me. I pushed on, telling myself that it was nothing. But the deeper I went, the stronger the feeling became. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every sound seemed amplified now, the crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see someone standing there, just out of sight. But there was nothing, just the thick, silent forest. The trail started to climb again, steeper now, and I found myself breathing a little heavier. The air felt thicker, as though something had changed. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath, looking around me. The woods were still, too still. Even the birds had stopped singing. It was then that I noticed something strange. There, at the base of a large tree, was a pile of rocks. It wasn't a natural formation. It was too neat, too deliberate. Someone had placed these rocks there, but for what reason? I knelt down to get a better look. They were arranged in a circle, and in the center of the circle was a single piece of red cloth. I didn't touch it. Something about it felt wrong. I stood up quickly and moved away from the rocks, my heart rate increasing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew that whatever was going on here, it wasn't good. I started walking faster now, my pace quickening without even thinking about it. The feeling of being watched had become unbearable. The woods around me felt too quiet, too oppressive. The canopy above was denser now, blocking out more and more light. The trees seemed to grow closer together, and the path seemed to wind in strange ways, like it was leading me deeper into the forest, further away from any kind of civilization. I tried to focus on the trail, to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But then I heard something, soft, barely audible at first, like a whisper. I stopped dead in my tracks. It came again, a little louder this time, like someone was calling my name. My stomach churned, and I felt a wave of nausea hit me. No one was out here. I was alone. I took a step forward, the feeling of panic starting to creep up my spine. The whispering continued, and it sounded wrong. The voice was low, almost guttural, like it was coming from deep within the earth. It wasn't human, couldn't be. I took another step, but the ground beneath me shifted. I slipped on a patch of loose dirt, stumbling to catch myself, and when I looked up again, the trail ahead had changed. The path wasn't where it had been just a moment ago. It was as if the woods had rearranged themselves. The trees were now standing in different places. The underbrush had thickened, and the air had turned colder. I turned around, expecting to see the trail I had come from, but all I saw was dense, tangled forest. There was no sign of the path behind me, no familiar markers, nothing to show me where I'd been. Panic surged through me. I was lost. The whispering grew louder, now accompanied by soft, shuffling noises. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it was all around me. I turned in every direction, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing. just the oppressive silence of the forest and the feeling that something was waiting just beyond my sight. I took off, running now, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there, but the more I ran, the more disoriented I became. The trees seemed to close in on me, the ground uneven and treacherous. Every turn I made only seemed to lead me further into the forest, and I could feel the panic rising, threatening to overwhelm me. Suddenly, I stumbled into a small clearing. It was an odd spot, a circular patch of ground with no trees, just tall grass and wildflowers. At first, it seemed like a welcome break from the dense woods, but as I looked around, I realized something wasn't right. The clearing was too perfect. The grass was untouched, the flowers in full bloom, as though no one had ever set foot here. It was pristine, like it had been preserved in some kind of unnatural way. In the center of the clearing was a large, flat rock. It was smooth, like it had been polished, and it seemed out of place in the middle of this wild forest. I approached it cautiously, my eyes scanning the area. Something about the rock felt significant. As I stepped closer, I saw that it wasn't just a rock. There were carvings on it. They were faint, but they looked ancient, as though they had been etched into the stone by something with sharp claws or teeth. The carvings depicted strange symbols, twisted lines, spirals, and jagged shapes. I didn't recognize any of them, but they gave me an uneasy feeling. I stepped back, suddenly afraid that I had found something I wasn't meant to see. That's when I heard it, a rustling sound coming from the edge of the clearing. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Something was moving in the brush. I slowly turned my head, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was, but the forest remained still. The rustling continued, though closer now. I started backing away from the clearing, my eyes darting around, but I couldn't see anything. Then, just as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something moving out of the corner of my eye. It was fast, too fast, and I saw only a shadow, no face, no form, just a blur. I ran. There was no time to think, no time to question what had just happened. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, but the woods seemed endless. Every time I thought I was nearing the edge, the trees would stretch further, and the trail would disappear. The whispering came again, louder now, almost deafening. It was like something was chasing me, always just a few steps behind. I stumbled, falling hard to the ground, my hands scraping against the rough earth. But when I looked up, there it was, a break in the trees, the sun breaking through the canopy. It was just a few more steps. I could see the edge of the forest. I could hear the sound of the highway, distant but real. I pushed myself to my feet and ran, this time with everything I had left. My chest burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop until I broke through the trees and saw the road ahead. I didn't look back, couldn't. I don't know what happened out there. Maybe it was all in my head. But when I finally made it back to the trailhead, I noticed something strange. There, on the ground, just outside the entrance to the forest, was a pile of rocks, just like the ones I'd seen earlier. And in the center, a single piece of red cloth. I've never gone hiking there again. When I was a kid, probably around 10 years old, my parents took us on a backpacking trip through the Great Smoky Mountains. It was meant to be a week-long trip, and while parts of it were tough, I still remember most of it pretty fondly. That trip gave me my first real experience with long hikes, setting up camp in the backcountry, filtering creek water, and falling asleep under the trees. But one thing I don't ever forget, and I probably never will, is the night that something stung me inside my sleeping bag, and how close that trip came to ending very differently. The whole trip had been planned for a while. My dad was always into hiking and camping, and my mom had warmed up to it over time. She liked the family bonding part, and she liked seeing us kids get worn out from all the walking. I had an older brother and a younger sister, and we were all spaced out in age by a few years, so getting us to agree on stuff wasn't always easy. But that trip had something for all of us. My brother liked how tough it made him feel, carrying a pack and pushing through miles every day. My sister liked being outdoors with the birds and little chipmunks darting around. I just liked being somewhere different, We drove down from Ohio and entered the Smokies on the North Carolina side. The plan was to do a loop, starting from one trailhead, working our way through the mountains for about 6 or 7 days, and ending at a second trailhead where the car would be waiting after a shuttle brought it around. My dad had reserved backcountry sites for each night, and everything was mapped out. This was before I had a cell phone or anything like that, and even if we'd had one, the coverage out there was non-existent. Most of the first couple days went smoothly. The trails were steep in places, and I remember my legs hurting more than I wanted to admit. My pack felt huge even though it wasn't heavy by adult standards. My dad carried most of the food. I had my own clothes, sleeping bag, and little pad rolled up and strapped to the outside. The air was humid but fresh, the kind of air that makes everything feel slower and heavier, but somehow more peaceful. When you're a kid, you don't really think about the effort of hiking. It's just something that happens to you mile after mile. We set up camp each night at the designated sites. Some had little clearings, and others were just rough spots off the trail. There were no toilets, no benches, no fire rings, just dirt and trees. I had a little one-person tent that zipped up on all sides. It wasn't spacious, but it kept me dry and kept the bugs out, or so I thought. One thing that stood out during that trip, even from the very first day, was the number of millipedes. They were everywhere, not just on the trail, but on trees, rocks, sometimes crawling right over our packs if we set them down for a snack. They weren't exactly scary, but they were always there, and they were huge, some as long as my hand and thick as a pencil. When it came time to pack up camp each morning, we had to be careful shaking out tents and tarps. You'd roll up a tent and hear that soft crunch and know you just packed up part of a millipede. It got to the point where we made it part of our morning routine. Unzip the tent, tap it a few times, kick the corners, and shake it out hard before touching anything else. By the 4th or 5th night, the novelty of the trip had worn off a bit. We were tired, a little sore, and everything felt damp. Even when it didn't rain, the humidity just clung to everything. Clothes, sleeping bags, the inside of our shoes. We'd stopped at a creek to fill up our water bottles, and I remember watching tiny fish dart between the rocks while my dad pumped water through the filter. We were still deep in the woods, miles away from anything, and I remember feeling small in a way that was both exciting and unsettling. It's one thing to go for a hike in the park. It's another to know that the nearest road is probably 15 miles away, and you'd have to hike a solid day just to reach it. That night, we set up camp in a small clearing just off the trail. Trees closed in on all sides, and we could hear the steady buzz of insects the minute we stopped walking. The whole world just seemed alive. I remember kicking at the ground before setting my tent down because I didn't want to crush a whole city of millipedes. My brother teased me about it, but I didn't care. I didn't like the idea of them squirming around under me all night. We had a simple dinner, freeze-dried pasta and trail mix, and by dark, we were all zipped into our tents. Mine was pitched under a large tree, slightly downhill from the others, maybe 20 or 30 feet away. I laid there in my sleeping bag, listening to the usual chorus of tree frogs and insects, feeling the soft rise and fall of the ground beneath me. I wasn't scared. I'd gotten used to the dark by then, and the sounds didn't bother me. Sometime after I dozed off, I woke up suddenly. Not because of a sound, not because someone called out, just that strange shift you feel when your body knows something isn't quite right. It was warm inside the sleeping bag, and I remember reaching down to adjust how I was laying. That's when I felt it. Something was crawling along my leg, slow and light, like a fingertip tracing a line on my skin. My first thought was that it was a millipede. I'd been so careful, but maybe one had slipped in when I'd unzipped the door to climb in earlier. I froze. I didn't want to crush it, didn't want it to bite me if it felt threatened. I stayed still and tried to figure out what to do. Then, right as I was about to gently shake my leg, I felt a sharp, stabbing pain just below my calf. It wasn't the slow pinch of a spider or the itchy burn of a mosquito. It felt like a nail being driven in for half a second and then pulled out. I sat bolt upright in the tent, heart pounding, and scrambled to unzip the bag. I shoved my legs out, kicking wildly at the air, and flailed around until I could get the zipper open and drag myself out onto the damp ground. My leg was burning. I grabbed at it through my pants, half expecting to find a fong or stinger still stuck in there. but there was nothing but the ache. I yanked up my pant leg and saw the red mark swelling up fast. It didn't take long to realize it had been a bee. Somehow, a bee had gotten into my sleeping bag. I don't know if it was in my clothes when I climbed in or if it had gotten in earlier when I was airing the tent out. Either way, it was a stupid, awful mistake. My leg was throbbing, and even though I wasn't allergic, the sting was right in the muscle and made it hard to walk. I didn't cry. I was too shocked for that. I just sat there, in the dark, shaking slightly from adrenaline, and held my calf. Eventually, I crawled back into the tent and zipped it up tight. I didn't sleep much after that. Every rustle felt like another bee. My leg kept pulsing, and I couldn't get comfortable. The hours passed slow, and I watched the shadows of branches shift slightly with the moonlight. Morning finally came, and I told my parents what had happened. They checked it out, confirmed it looked like a bee sting, and gave me something for the swelling. My dad offered to shorten the hike and exit the trail early if I couldn't walk comfortably, but I insisted on finishing the trip. I don't know if it was pride or just stubbornness, but I limped through the last couple days with my calf swollen and sore. Looking back now, it doesn't sound like the scariest thing in the world, a single bee sting. But when you're 10 years old, lying alone in the woods, miles from help, trapped inside a zipped-up bag with something crawling on you, it's terrifying. It taught me to respect the little things more than the big things. Bears and cliffs and thunderstorms are dramatic and obvious. But it's the small things, the things you don't see until it's too late, that can really mess with you. Even now, as an adult who's done more hiking and backpacking in different places, I still think about that night in the Smokies. I still double-check my sleeping bag before I climb in. I shake out every piece of clothing and keep my tent zipped unless I'm crawling in or out. I've never had anything quite like that happen again, but I've never forgotten it either. I think about that trip in Zaleski State Forest more often than I probably should. It happened a decade ago, but I remember it in pieces. Sometimes just a flash of something small, like the way the mist hung over the trees at dawn or the damp weight of the leaf litter under my boots. Other times, I remember the whole thing at once, like it was a single, drawn-out moment that's been sitting in the back of my mind all these years, waiting for the right silence to crawl into. I've hiked all over since then, including a few sections of the AT, and nothing else has ever unsettled me the same way. Not even close. It was early October, still warm enough to hike comfortably during the day, but cold at night. The leaves had started to change. Southern Ohio is thick with trees, old hardwood forests that go on for miles, quiet except for the wind and the dry rustling of things you can't see. My dad had brought up the trip maybe a week earlier, and my uncle jumped in right away. We decided to make a weekend out of it, me, my dad, my uncle, and my two cousins, who were both a couple years younger than me. We all had decent experience with backpacking and gear. It wasn't supposed to be anything unusual, just a few nights in the woods to hike and camp. Back then, Google Maps barely touched that area. We couldn't rely on GPS. I remember sitting in the back seat of the car with a folded-up paper map across my lap, trying to trace the route my dad was driving. No cell service at all. I remember that part clearly, because we lost the trailhead once and had to double back down a gravel road that didn't even look like it should have been there. The forest was already thick at the edges, nothing but trunks and shadows as far as you could see in any direction. It felt like stepping out of one world and into another the moment we left the car behind. We parked at a pull-off near one of the main loops. Zaleski has a decent system of backpacking trails, and we picked a direction that would keep us out overnight and far enough in to avoid casual foot traffic. There wasn't a soul around, no other cars, no distant road noise. It was just us, our packs, and the sound of our boots on dirt. We started hiking mid-morning, found a place to set up camp in the late afternoon, and spaced ourselves out like we usually did, each of us with our own one-person tent, about 20 or 30 feet apart. Enough for some personal space, but not so far we couldn't call out if we needed to. It had worked well on other trips. That first night, we camped in an area we had heard about from a friend of my uncle's. Something about an old tunnel that was supposed to be nearby, maybe abandoned, maybe used for trains at some point decades ago. I never saw the tunnel itself. We weren't really looking for it, not seriously, but we knew we were in the right general area. I didn't think anything of it at the time. There are always stories in places like that, about old mines or ghost tracks or people seeing lights in the trees. I'd heard plenty of those over the years. Most of them are recycled tales that get passed around until nobody remembers where they started. I didn't believe in anything haunted, and I still don't. But there's something about being several miles deep into a forest, beyond the reach of phones or maps, where the only certainty is your own footsteps and what you brought with you. In that kind of place, everything feels closer. We had a fire going until late. It wasn't big, just enough to cook and warm our hands. My cousin and I had found a few logs to sit on, and we shared some of the food we brought. Standard camp stuff. My dad always packed light but smart. Jerky, oats, dry soup mixes, things like that. We stayed up talking until the fire was just glowing coals. I remember looking up and seeing the stars through the canopy. No light pollution at all. Just that deep black sky and a sharp cold starting to set in. Eventually, we all turned in. I zipped myself into my tent, slid into my bag, and laid there listening to the small, constant sounds of the woods. A few crickets, the occasional branch shifting under its own weight, the scrape of some animal rooting through the leaves. Nothing unusual. I drifted off pretty quickly. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. I didn't have a watch on, and there was no point trying my phone with no signal. But it was deep night, black as pitch inside the tent. Cold too. I could see my breath. And then I heard it, one loud, sharp bang. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Loud enough to vibrate my chest. Like metal. Not just a crash, but something explosive. Not like thunder or a tree falling. I've heard both before. This was something else. I froze in my bag. It sounded like something massive had just been dropped from a height. Like a car had fallen from the sky and smashed into the ground a few hundred yards away. My first thought was a rock slide, but the terrain didn't match. There weren't cliffs here. Just rolling forest and a few hills. No high elevation, and no sign of other people, let alone vehicles. I laid there, heart pounding, waiting for the next sound. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no shouting. Just silence again, like the forest had sucked all the air out of itself. I stayed awake until dawn, didn't unzip the tent, didn't even shift much. I just listened. Once in a while, I thought I heard something light in the distance, like metal creaking or being dragged slowly. But I couldn't be sure. Could have been my imagination. Could have been a distant tree groaning in the wind. I told myself that over and over until I almost believed it. When the light finally came through the fabric of my tent, I sat up slowly, unzipped the flap, and stepped out. Everything looked normal. The fire pit was still there, cold ashes undisturbed. The forest was quiet, dew clinging to the leaves. My dad emerged a few minutes later. He looked tired. So did my uncle. We didn't say anything about the noise. Not yet. Just packed up our stuff, had a quick breakfast, and got moving. It wasn't until a few miles into the next leg that someone finally said, "Did you guys hear that loud crash last night?" Turns out we all heard it. Every one of us had woken up. My dad described it as a metal explosion. My uncle said it sounded like a bridge collapsing. None of us could explain it. There were no roads anywhere near us. We had hiked in several miles from the trailhead, and the nearest structures were either ruins or too far to make that kind of noise. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't an animal. It was something else. We talked about it on and off during the day, but nobody had any answers. The only theory that kind of made sense was an old mine shaft or tunnel collapse. Maybe some kind of metal structure gave out under its own weight. But even then, the sound would have been more muffled through all that dirt and distance. This was sharp and immediate. Felt like it had happened right nearby. We didn't go looking for it. We could have backtracked, maybe tried to find the source. But I think we all had the same quiet thought we didn't really want to know. There was something final about the way that bang echoed through the trees. It wasn't a warning or a threat. It was like something ending, and we weren't supposed to be there to hear it. The second night was further into the forest, away from the supposed tunnel area. The air was colder, and the trees were taller. We set up camp the same way, spread out just enough. I laid in my tent that night listening again, every part of me waiting for another sound. But nothing came. No bangs, no crashes. Just the wind, the branches creaking above me, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush. I slept in pieces, light and tense, and I wasn't the only one. By morning, we were all ready to finish the loop and head back. We didn't talk much on the hike out, just the occasional comment about pace or landmarks. When we got back to the car, I felt like I was finally stepping out of something heavy, like I'd been carrying a question I couldn't answer. We loaded up our gear and left the forest behind. The gravel road felt almost too normal after days in the woods. Even now, I don't know what that sound was. I've read about old mining operations in that part of Ohio. There are supposed to be abandoned shafts, tunnels, and even entire stretches of track buried under decades of overgrowth. Maybe something finally gave out. Maybe we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and happened to catch the collapse of something forgotten. Or maybe there was never anything there at all. Maybe it was just a trick of the terrain and the air, the way sound carries in the woods. Maybe, but that doesn't explain how real it felt, how it shook the ground, how we all heard it at once and froze in the same breath. I've been on dozens of backpacking trips since. Section hikes on the AT, solo treks, group camps. I've seen bear tracks outside my tent, heard coyotes crying from hilltops, slept through thunderstorms that shook the trees like paper. But none of it ever got under my skin the way that bang did. Sometimes the forest just reminds you how little you actually know. And sometimes that reminder is loud enough to wake you out of a dead sleep and stay with you for 10 years. Probably longer.